Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on genealogy. I hope you're all safe and healthy. So tonight's webinar is part of a series of events organised by the Kurdish Women's Movement. We are currently live streaming this on YouTube. So my name is Ida and I'm a member of the Jineolojî Committee of England and Wales. And this event is organised by Jine, Kurdish Women's Office for Peace, and part of Women Weaving the Future, which is a network of different institutions and structures of the Kurdish women's movement. This is part of a weekly seminar series on the history, theory, and practice of the Kurdish women's movement, which you can see the whole series on the poster here. So there will be one next week as well. And so far, there have been talks on issues like femicide, self-defense, women's autonomy, and more. And all of these talks can be found on YouTube. And the women's movement is also organizing monthly panels with activists from around the world. So you can find information about those online as well. And in this webinar, Anna will be joining us to talk about genealogy, which is a science of women and life, co-developed by the Kurdish women's movement and struggling women around the world. So just a really short introduction. Anna will give us a lot more information tonight, but just to introduce it, genealogy is not just a women's history project, but it's a different approach to knowledge production and science as a whole. Through genealogy, we can confront the Western and patriarchal tradition of positivism. So instead of trying to present our understanding of the world as neutral, we can examine different aspects of women's history and life through a focus on mythology, unwritten history, and women's lived experiences today. And through this work, we can also challenge our own ideas about what scientific knowledge is and who it is for. And that's why genealogy is an international project. It's important for women's struggles everywhere. So before we start, just a few things. So you'll be able to ask questions in written form here on the Zoom chat, as well as in the YouTube chat and comments functions. And we'll be collecting questions from the chats and comments, and hopefully all questions can be answered at the end of this webinar. So you can send them in throughout, and we'll get to them towards the end. So to introduce our speaker, we're hearing tonight from Anna, who has been part of establishing the Genealogy Academy. And tonight she's joining us from the Andrea Wolf Institute in Rojava, where she has been part of carrying out research work on women's history, as well as sociological research on the impact of revolution on women's lives and their hopes for the future. Welcome, Anna.
Hello. I greet you with all the warmth of the revolution and the summer in Rojava.
That's a lot of warmth.
Heat.
So, shall we get started?
Yeah.
Okay.
I once again want to greet all the participants and to the Women Waving the Future webinar series. Actually, like if we start with the question, what meaning has genealogy in this context? Like you choose the topic Women Weaving the Future. Actually, you see the symbol of the Genealogy Academy up there. It's a nanny or a goddess that is spinning the yarn. So we can say actually the basic material of wisdom and knowledge with which we can weave our future. This is a bit what genealogy is about. So it's the thread or the yarn that relates to ancient women's knowledge, and it relates to the labor, the effort of women. And genealogy aims to share this basis of analysis and discussions with women from all over the world. So in this relation, genealogy is a very essential part also of how women and with which materials women can weave the future. Actually, the friends who have followed the former seminar or webinar on the coronavirus pandemic, when you listen to the presentation of Lorena from Guatemala, actually she gave already an introduction in what does genealogy mean. So it's about the critics of positivism as an ideology of capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, but it's also to connect to women's ancient wisdom, to spirituality, to knowledge, and to produce and share awareness to fight the system of oppression and to create alternatives. So all of this in a very nice, in a very beautiful way, Lorena shared with us in the webinar, previous webinar. But maybe to start with a very basic, because genealogy is not a word that you can find in any dictionary so far. So about what is the meaning of genealogy, where does it come from? The word Jineoloj is composed of the Kurdish expression jin, which means translated in English means woman, but also has its root in the other Kurdish word jian, which means life, and a bit further maybe, but also in linguistic closeness, we have the term of juvak, jin, jian, juvak. Woman, life, society. This is an expression that in the Kurdish language comes from the same root. And in this sense also, we define woman as a social, political, historical, biological existence and identity that is has created life, has created society, has built up very important findings for the history of humanity. So on one hand, like this definition of woman, to see it, woman as a holistic being, but with all her diversities. So also to see the differences that women in different parts of the world, in different cultures live through, and the diversities that there are between women. So it's also woman, to define a woman is one task of genealogy. And the second part of the word, like logy, science, of course, like you will find the word of science in formal dictionaries. So it means to build, to collect, to analyze, to organize knowledge, or to systematically analyze knowledge. But of course, the methods that have been implemented, like doing research by experiments that have to be proved, and these kind of positivist approaches. This is something that with genealogy we want. We're questioning this, and we are seeing that many like the positivist approach of science has led to the biggest catastrophes in humanity. So instead of having an understanding of science as a means of power and which claims to be objective or universal, we want to redefine science and rebuild science as a means of liberation, of women and society. So in our definition, also science means to build, to collect, to analyze, to organize knowledge, and of course to share it. And of course, knowledge that is useful for our lives, that is useful for living in balance and in with nature, and living sharing life with people from different cultures and all over the world. I mean, just to yeah, maybe we can say, if we just want to give an example how destructive the positivist approach of science has been, that is based on calculations of profit and is disconnected from ethical values and disconnected from empathy and social responsibility. Today is the 75th anniversary of the nuclear bomb throwing on Nagasaki. So Nagasaki, Hiroshima are really examples that show in which way the so-called objective science or positivist science has been used and has led to the biggest destruction in humanity. Already also in the previous webinar, we discussed about the examples how the question about corona, where it comes from, what have been or what are the approaches in the medical industry today, and how is made profits with people's lives, and how even diseases are on purpose spread, or then medications are created for this. So this approach of science as a means of power and gaining money against of this, Genealogy strives for building up a science that relates to the ancient knowledge and wisdom of women, and can today be give an answer to the questions that we are all concerned with. So what is the meaning of life? How can we establish a life that is based on values of freedom, of democracy, of ecological empathy, and sharing with nature rather than to exploit nature. So, but if we think, why has it been called Jineolojî, or a women's science of women's women life and society? Maybe we can shortly say, so throughout the history of patriarchy, on one hand, women's history has been denied. So matriarchal societies, the existence of this and the creations that and contributions for humankind. Also women philosophers, artists, freedom fighters, we don't find them in most of the history books and resources. So it's about that women need to rediscover and to write her own history, or her story, we can say. This is one reason why genealogy is a need. On the other hand, women's wisdom and knowledge has been degraded or eliminated or stolen by the capitalist and patriarchal system in order to be able to establish a system in which knowledge has become a means of power. So maybe as an example that shows it the most obvious, we can say that the knowledge of women about her bodies, about herbal medicine, about natural healing methods, in order to be able to gain control over women's bodies and to use medicine as a way of controlling people's lives, or gain control over people's lives and health. therefore, like the witch hunts or the burning of biggest feminicide in history, we can say, has been carried out in Europe during the ages of Enlightenment. So, and during this time, when because women's wisdom and knowledge has been so much either eliminated or stolen, we really see the need to connect again to traditions and to the wisdom that women have all around the world about nature, about their bodies, about their society, about life experience, what they gained out of their life experiences in order to build up society and to also connect it to feelings, to empathy, and not just to say, to perceive science or knowledge as something that is about calculations and numbers. On the other hand, or in together with this, due to patriarchy, women's existences and identities also have been denied, oppressed, and eliminated. I talked or gave the examples of the witch hunts, but also the exclusion of women of public life, of decision making, the neglect of women's will, feelings, or thoughts that we experience in all parts of our lives, in our relationships with our surrounding, and family relationships, and close emotional relationships. So therefore, to give meaning to our existence as a woman and to be able to live with our own identity, Genealogy, in this sense, is also about defending the existence, the autonomy, and identity of women. And in this sense, so if we ask how did Genealogy emerge, how have the works been built up, we have to see that the origin of this is in the Kurdish women's freedom struggle and the experiences and theoretical development on one side. And on the other hand, also Genealogy refers to the gains and experiences of women's movements and feminist struggles all around the world, and strives to contribute to stagnations that have been there in these struggles. Or it's more about the question, how altogether can we achieve a women's revolution in the sense that we can liberate our lives, that we can build up a society that is based on justice and in which all peoples can live with their own identity. In this connection, maybe if we talk about the origin of genealogy in the context of the Kurdish women's movement, I think it's important to see that genealogy, or the discussions around genealogy, started from 2009-10 onwards. At that time, the defense writings of Abdullah Öcalan, Sociology of Freedom, were published, and there he proposed genealogy as an approach that can contribute to strengthen the struggle of feminist movements, of women's liberations movements, as one component of building up democratic modernity. But of course, Genealogy has its roots in more than 30 years of women's liberation movement in Kurdistan. The approach different to maybe other liberation movements in the Kurdish liberation movement has always been that the women's revolution cannot be postponed to after the victory or after the revolution, but that it means to build up free relationships and the way of life that we imagine today. So to see the struggle for women's freedom as the basis of a struggle of liberating a country, liberating a society. And of course, revolution also starts in our minds. So it's not only about the physical process, of course, the physical process of um, getting or liberate yourself from institutions and state that occupy society is also a very important part. But if we cannot liberate our minds out of the patriarchal and state logic that makes us or puts us in this situation of being inferior, being the second gender, being weak, then we also cannot overcome these relationships of oppression and inequality. So therefore, it's of course necessary that we build up useful knowledge and that we can advance the revolution here and now and start thinking beyond the borders that have been created by patriarchy and colonialism. So in this sense also it's necessary, or we need to know that nobody can make this revolution for us, for society, for women, but that it can only be made by women and by the society. And on this, based on this principles, we can see that in the history of the Kurdish women's movement, there have been very important steps that led towards the point that Genealogy came on the agenda. There were on one hand the analysis about the specific situation of women and family in Kurdistan that started in the late 80s. Then more theoretical works were pointing out that in order to overcome the relationships of power, it needs a point of separation. So the theory of separation, or also which was called like in dialogues that Abdullah Öcalan had with Turkish left revolutionaries that came and discussed with him at the academy. It was called like killing the man, like in this sense, the theory of separation or the theory of killing the man, which meant to split off from the patriarchal narratives and habits that were imposed on both men and women, and for men also to see the necessity to overcome patriarchal mindset and behavior. In this sense, also many research works about women's history and the culture of Mother Goddess in Mesopotamia were carried out. The women's liberation ideology was a part of this process in 1998. And then, of course, like on one hand, if you, from the situation where you're questioning the status quo, also the discussions about how do we imagine a free life, what are principles for free women, principles for free men, a draft for a new social contract, how can it look like? So these discussions in the beginning of the 21st century in connection with a paradigm of democratic ecological society, which is based on women's freedom. All these discussions that were connected with concrete steps also in how to organize and how to lead the struggle in Kurdistan, how to connect with movements all around the world. All these steps were the foundation on which then Genealogy, together with the discussions about sociology of freedom, came on the agenda in the year 2010. And actually, it took us some time also to understand that Genealogy as a concept is not happening by itself, but it needs active steps. So organizing also a committee, organizing the works of building up the Genealogy Academy in order to define concrete steps and projects were important. So especially from 2015 onwards, where a conference was held, and as a result, the manual this big a start for Genealogy, or start for Genealogy was published out of this discussions. This is what are the origins of Genealogy in the context of the Kurdish women's movement, and especially it became, of course, more and more crucial with the process of building up democratic autonomy in all four parts of Kurdistan, but especially also with the Rojava revolution, in which the situation is until now that we try to build up an alternative way of self-administration, self-governance, in which women have defined their own policies, define their aims, and are building up, playing a very important role in building up all parts of society. I will come back to this later, but and of course, Genealogy at the same time is not disconnected from world women's history and the values that have been created. So not only the history of Mesopotamia, but we see that there's a heritage all over the world about values of mother-centered societies, or culture of mother goddesses, like from Pachamama to the Venus of Wilmersdorf. We see all around the world the traces of Neolithic societies or natural societies in which women or women clan societies, which were not based on hierarchies, which were based on communal life, sharing knowledge, and giving value to nature, to life, to all people within society. So these foundations of knowing that there has been another way to organize life, society, living together, that there hasn't been always this patriarchal family model, but there were other forms of communal life, and they are still existing. this is, of course, a very important resource of women's values and history that we are connecting to. And of course, there's also the heritage of collective and individual resistances of women against patriarchy and any form of oppression, against resistances against colonialization, against labor oppression, against fascism, against the exploitation of land and resources. So this is at the same time also one of the bases of genealogy and the knowledge that women gained in these struggles. Of course, also in this context, the evaluation of feminist struggles, the gains that have been created by women gaining conscience about their collective oppression due to their gender. So especially the definition and analysis of sexism and patriarchy, and that women became aware that patriarchal oppression is nothing natural or created by God, but that it was ideological, socially and politically constructed. So feminist theory and practices, of course, are also one of the bases that Genealogy refers to. But at the same time, of course, we see that there are some shortcomings or stagnations in also in the feminist discourses. So Genealogy offers also the possibility to reflect about this. How can we contribute to strengthening the women's struggles, the organizing of women, to creating alternatives with the women's point of view in different countries all over the world. So seeing the local and connecting it to the global. And one important aim, of course, is, as we criticize with the positivist science, the approach of separation, of splitting theory from practice, of atomizing knowledge and science in different categories, like natural science, social science, and within this all, like dividing all the knowledge. We see that it is very important to have an approach that is connecting the different methods and and fields of knowledge and action, the fields of life with one another, and have a holistic point of view. And especially to overcome like this subject-object division, in which is like the basis for not only for positivist science, but also we see how mechanisms of oppression function, and what is the mentality that they are based on. It might from sexism, racism, nationalism, Orientalism. It's the division of people into subject and object, like the subject that rules, that defines, that governs, and the object of women, people, society, that are in the position of or that they should listen or obey to the rules and the demands of this, what those in power are imposing on them. So the process of genealogy means actually to re-establish a unity diversity of our political statements and our ways of life, of our thoughts and feelings, of our words and actions, so that we can counteract sexist ideologies and positivist science. And it's, of course, about enlightening women's history to see how, like through colonizing women's bodies, women's thoughts, at the same time also society as a whole was colonialized, and so in order to overcome this, of course, we need a new theory of knowledge, or epistemology, which serves to become free individuals and to establish a free society. This means, like, so that we can overcome the impact of colonialization, of manipulation of our minds, that we can connect our thoughts with our emotions, with our intuitions, and that we can develop a new social science from women's perspectives. So therefore, it's also, of course, necessary that we find methods that are suitable for this, in which we can have a productive and creative dialectic way of analyzing, of seeing ourselves as a part of the way on how to come to results. And aims of genealogy, of course, are maybe in shortly I can describe as to reach a definition and understanding of freedom, to contribute to develop free relationships, and to succeed in realizing a women's revolution, and to overcome to the further developments of feminist struggles and struggles for building up a free life that are going on all over the world. So in order for this, of course, also to question and overcome orientalist or liberal tendencies within feminist theory and practice is also one of the aims or one of the efforts that Genealogy is concerned with. Maybe as a short introduction, I can say this. I don't know if I should continue with what are present works and issues of Genealogy, or
Thank you, Anna. That's been a really, really interesting overview of the history of genealogy and the importance. I think you've really outlined in such a clear way the importance of genealogy and why it really is, something for all feminists and all women to think about, how to engage with. I wanted to ask you if you could give some examples of the kind of current work of genealogy. And I also think, because you were talking about the kind of importance of bringing together theory and practice, and also how genealogy is always looking at kind of communal ways of living and trying to examine these more empathetic ways of being with each other. I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of method of genealogy and how those aspects of, kind of working collectively are kind of realized within how research is done in genealogy.
Mm-hmm. Like for the present works, of course, Jineolojî Academy is organizing itself in different ways in all four parts of Kurdistan, and also in Europe. There's the Jineolojî Committee in different countries, Jineolojî committees and working groups have been established during the last 2-3 years. So this is we don't have enough time to give an overview overall. Maybe it's then better, instead of just rushing through, to give one example or some examples from our research and education works in the context of the Rojava Revolution. Many of the discussion issues actually that Genealogy is concerned with. There's also a Genealogy magazine that is published in Turkey, or in the Turkish language, and like in North Kurdistan in Turkey. It's a 3-monthly magazine. So for all those who can speak Turkish language, there are also efforts to trying to translate it into different languages, but maybe to have a bit an impression what are the agendas that we try to elaborate or to discuss, to develop analysis and discussions that can contribute on giving new ways of understanding. The first magazine was about the crisis of social science, and then it was followed by the methodology of women. There were numbers about women's revolution, self-defense, women's self-defense, the crisis of the Middle East, the nature of women, what does it mean, nature of men, what is this, free communal life or free partnership life in Kurdish, like the concept Hevjiana Azad. The last numbers has been about women's economy. So different aspects that we as women see the need for developing our points of view and developing alternative concepts and proposals for solution. This is just to give an idea what are like main discussions or points of discussions that have been on the agenda of educations and theoretical work in relation to the reality that we live in, and trying to find an answer that have been on the agenda of Jineolojî committees in different parts of Kurdistan and also abroad. On the other hand, in Rojava, I want to give the example on a research work that we carried out with the aim of finding out more about the resources or historical foundation of the women's revolution. Like if we say that it goes back, or that we are now in the second, actually living the time of a second women's revolution in the area of the Fertile Crescent, and we see the historical foundation of it in the Neolithic time, in the women-centered society, mother goddess culture. We wanted to find out more what are the traces of this that we can, on one hand, physically in places, find here in places in Rojava. There are more 13,000 hills all over Rojava, which in all of the layers carry a history of about 15,000 years of human settlement life. And so while on one hand there's a war waged on this region that is aimed on destroying this foundation of human social life. On the other hand, we see that there are many traces that are worth to be seen, documented, and also evaluated, because until now the archaeological excavations were all made by government delegations in collaboration or by colonialist exhibition, how is it called? Like colonialist teams came here and stole the mother goddesses from here and brought them to the museums of Berlin, London, Paris, and so on. So it's like the actual findings that are important resources. A big part of this has been stolen, but there are still many things that are available here. And so it was for us, one part of this work was to document and also to ask the people that are living next to these gears or like these hills or archaeological places, what they know about this history. So while trying to get like to get findings at the same time, by asking the people that are living there, or if the by asking them, they also thought about it and found and themselves got more curious and engaged to examine the history. We try to collect it, also oral history, like stories, songs of women that can give us more evidences about the history of women and their position in society. So the next point of this research work was concerned with what problems of society have been developing due to patriarchy, due to colonialism, due to invasions, and due to the split that was created in society. Which role did religion play in this context? And so what problems of society are there that needs to be resolved, and how they are interconnected with one another? That was the second topic of the research that we carried out. And in relation to this, the question of the third part, what is the impact of the revolution on women's lives and the life of society? What have women gained through this struggle, and what challenges they are confronted with, what changes have started in society, and which points are still struggles to be fought to overcome patriarchy and the impact of state on society. And the fourth part of this work was concerned with the questions: what are women's perspectives for the future? So asking women what are their plans for life, how what they wish for the future of their children here in Rojava. And actually, like maybe all these four topics are, each of it is could be a work of its own, but we found it very important to make this connection between the history of this soil, the the problems that were created, and how this history of building up society, agriculture, culture, and many values of society, and at the same time the history of this break that has been created through patriarchy, state, private property, and colonialism. So in some, to see that in nowadays actually we have this clash of this different civilizations and mentalities. Therefore, and also to see what potential of solution is there if we connect to ancient knowledge, and yeah, how to continue. Like while like in sense of method, we set up a committee that has been working on this, and we worked and the works were organized in the sense that in all the different regions of Canton, Jizre, Kobani, and Afrin, we work together with women that know their society, or like the village, the history very good. So we made, on one hand, we made interviews. On the other hand, we made set up discussion groups on certain topics, about history, about natural health methods, about the life experiences of women. So it was a process on also making women themselves aware of what they have gained, which knowledge they have that before they haven't seen much value of this. So it was actually a process of creating conscience and self-conscience of women, creating new agendas of discussions and interests. And as a result, while these works were going on, we saw the need that actually this working together, researching the history of the local communities, that it is something that needs continuity, and that there's a very rich potential, and that especially there are many old women that have had very precious knowledge, but that generation that has become very old, and if we're not able to document their knowledge now, maybe many things or an important part of women's history and knowledge will never be reachable for us. So in this context, we set up research centers. The first was established in 2017 in Afrin, and the works also in Afrin have been very, very important, because now many of the places that our friends went to for this research works, like the temple in Eindare, or the Izidi graves and holy places, they are now under occupation or have been destroyed and looted. So even there we can see that it was good that we didn't wait any longer. But of course also we have, like, one purpose of this research is also to contribute that again Afrin will be free, and that women can again live on their own soils. But for the research centers, like local research centers that were established, was the first in Afrin, then in Derik, in Minbic, Hasaki, Kobani, that carried out local research according to the needs and agenda of the region. There have been projects about storytelling, or the oral history for children, for instance, about Kurdish destan, ancient histories, and what are their meanings, and to make these stories, fairy tales, be known to the children, to get the children a bit away from the internet and digital phones. Then at the same time, there have been some of the centers worked about women's history in the Middle East, others about natural health, knowledge of natural health, and especially like during the time on with the attacks on Afrin, Serikani, Girisipi. Also, one part of the works was concerned with documenting and interviewing the impact of this occupation war on women's life. And at the same time, like during the process of carrying out the research works, the Genealogy faculty at the Rojava University has been established. The Institute Andrea Wolf, where we are now sitting. Another important point was the establishment of the village Jineoloj, like a women's village, and because like the need that women have a place where they can build up their own lives was also one important topic of the research process. On the other hand, also the inside the village, the healthcare point or small hospital, Shifa Jin, was opened on the 8th of March this year. So just in the time when the corona arrived, there was a step done to put the agenda of alternative healing methods, but also to have the possibility for women to get support for the health problems by medical or a healing team that is are only women, was a very important point. Something that that became very obvious for us when being involved in these works is that research actually is not only about writing a book in the end, but that on one hand, while you're asking yourself questions that you ask other women, they start to think about their lives, and at the same time they are again asking you new questions. So really a process of research that is also a process of creating conscience and to share knowledge, to share life experiences, and to come to conclusions. I think that was a very important and inspiring contribution for all. And also to see that it is not something of some just one is asking one, and it's not just once sided, but that it's a mutual process, and therefore also to discuss collectively, rather to see it as a process rather than just a question and an outcome, but to see it as an ongoing process, and also to give the space to the different forms of expression, to the different dialects, to also the way of sometimes poetry or songs in which women express their feelings and their life, the pains and also the joyful moments of their lives. All this has been very precious. So now we are in the stage of preparing the publishing of also of a book that has been a result of this, but at the same time many of the different aspects or knowledge that we gained from society we also shared in our educations at the different academies here, like questions that came up for us during this process. Again, we discussed in working groups, for instance, the understanding of freedom. There was one thing actually that was very interesting, was that like men, but also some women made the evaluation that in the process of the revolution in Rojava, women developed a wrong understanding of freedom. So it was the discussion of how do we define freedom? If we say there's a wrong understanding of freedom, what does this mean? And what are also, again, in which sense also patriarchy or patriarchal arguments try again to limit women somehow by these kind of evaluations. But many interesting new questions came up, and they again were discussed in many of the different education. So it's an ongoing process that we are still in at the moment. Maybe I can say this.
Thank you. That was so interesting. It was really good to hear some of those examples, and also to hear about how that kind of process of research, like you said, is also it's also a form of learning as well. It's a form of collective education through doing that research. I think we have time for one last question, and this is from Katie, who is a friend of ours, and so this relates to how Anna, you were talking about how genealogy has learned from kind of different feminist struggles and looked at women's history around the world. So this is a question kind of from like touching on that same thing. So Katie's asking, where would you suggest that women start to look in order to rediscover some of the knowledge and history that has been lost to us? And what methods we can use in our own countries outside of Kurdistan to add to this shared science of women and society? So I guess maybe if you wanted to give like a shorter answer, you could just kind of talk about what you would want women everywhere to learn from genealogy, and what kind of research should all of us be doing in the different parts of the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm. I think that every woman can contribute to genealogy, or every woman whose heart is beating for freedom and whose mind has questions in her mind how to establish a life beyond the borders of patriarchy patriarchy, state, and capitalism. Any woman who is in this search actually can also be a part or identify somehow with genealogy. I think it is really, one point is really important, like the question of what are the roots that we can connect to. Like roots, on one hand, the history, the women's history that we have in every region of the world, their local women's struggles that haven't found a place or that got forgotten. Like this age that we are living in of technology, of liberalism, telling us only think about today. It doesn't matter what has been in the past, that's all over and isn't of any importance. This kind of approach that disconnects us really from many of the values and the wisdom that our grandmothers and like grandmothers had. And so I think it's very important that everywhere women start to ask questions about this. What are the roots in our region that we can use or can relate to for establishing an alternative form of life, of economy, of living together, of education. What are the resources that we can build on? It's because the problems that we face are present everywhere. They are hitting in our face every moment of our lives. But what are really also positive values that we can relate to, that we can enjoy, what is in our surrounding, in our environment, in the nature, how we can learn from the nature and to overcome this estrangement, alienation that has been imposed on us. I think this is very important, really, to start this process with yourself, with your environment, with the local place you are living in, and make this connection. But then also to connect it with the struggles and with the knowledge and of women in other countries all around the world. So I think that really, especially this seminar program or webinar program of Women Waving the Future also is a very important contribution to this, to make it the resources, the rich resources that we have known to one another, inspire one another, and give us the strength and new ideas on how we can turn our struggle in this way, or give a direction to it, that we can start to build up our lives here and now, and find the means to defend and protect it also. So as a starting point, I would say this.
Thank you. And actually, we have one. I know I said that was the last question. We have one quick one. So, have you been doing projects with children and young people on topics of genealogy in Rojava? So that's one last question.
Okay. Actually, Genealogy is one of the lessons also in the school education from the ninth form onwards. So at first it was also in Afrin, then in Kobani, and now also in Jizre Canton. Genealogy is a lesson that is taught at the, I think it's comparable to sixth form, like gymnasium education. And at the same time, also there have been projects of Jineolojî Jiwan was established. There were camps, Jineolojî camps were organized where young women from different parts of Rojava came together, discussed about their problems as well as challenges they have inside the family, inside what are their wishes for the future, and learning also about new things, like from driving motorcycle to going swimming, and lessons about anatomy, women's anatomy, like topics that have been tabooized were also part of these kind of Jineolojî Jiwan camps. And at the same time, as I already mentioned, like for children, this kind of fairy tales telling sessions have been organized in some of the Geology research centers. So there are in each region different projects or points that there were children or young women especially are also playing an active role in the works of Genealogy.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing these perspectives with all of us this evening. I'm sure we're all energized and inspired to think about women's struggles and histories wherever we are, and to bring to our work this empathy and collective spirit of genealogy. It's been really good to hear different examples and also the kind of history and theoretical outlook of genealogy. So just wrapping up now. So next week you can join the webinar on women's confederalism, and that will be with Meral Çiçek from the Kurdish Women's Relations Office in Southern Kurdistan. So that will be next Sunday, the 16th of August, at the same time as today. And then there are these monthly discussions as well. And the next one of those will be on the 23rd of August on women's revolution as an antidote to capitalism. So you can tune into that one as well. So once more, a very big thank you to Anna for joining us and giving us this perspective tonight, and a thank you to everyone who's been organizing this session and helping out behind the scenes and bringing us together for this discussion. So thank you very much. Hope to see you next week, and I'm sending all my love and solidarity to everyone watching. Thank you.
Bye.